We are now calling the police. Stop.
Mr. Reimer, Pastor Reimer wanted to read scriptures from the Bible. He did so. It was on one of those portable microphone devices, and therefore it was somehow annoying or disturbing, or so was alleged. So there are rules, around the outdoor speaker use, right? Hours that you are and are not allowed to use them on public property, that kind of thing. That's not what he was ticketed for.
Right.
And also decibels. And again, not what he was ticketed for. Also, to our knowledge, of course, we didn't get to run the case, but to our knowledge, nobody asked him to leave. Nobody who is responsible for the area asked him or the counter protesters to leave. So there was some recognition that this was a valid exercise of civil liberties, but for whatever reason, Bible reading or whatever else he may have said was annoying and disturbing.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News. You are very likely aware that Pastor Derek Reimer was recently in court as an extension of the charges he received for protesting a drag story hour back on February 25th. Now, those court proceedings are unfolding and are ultimately set to culminate on December 5th and 6th. We'll bring you that story as it unfolds, but we do have another legal victory here now to mention. Another charge against Pastor Derek Reimer has been dropped, and in just a few moments we're going to be joined by Sarah Miller for an update. This, of course, legal victory thanks to your donations at SavePastorDerek.com.
They're having a meeting about protesters, and they want to put everybody on conditions now. Like, I'm already on conditions, can't be 200 meters within a protest. Now they want to put everybody, if they deem it hateful, that they can't be without, or they can't be within 100 meters of the protest. Otherwise, there's fines. I think it can be up to $10,000, up to a maximum year in jail. So this is a big deal. It's a really pivotal time here in Calgary, and that's why we're protesting this. We're going to do a Jericho March. We're going to go pray inside, and we're standing on our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is egregious and outrageous.
Well, Sarah, thanks so much for joining me. I got to tell you, I can't count the amount of times that I've been annoyed by a sound somebody made, but I've never thought to myself, well, this sucker better to lawyer up, because I'm coming after them with the full force of the law. But that's kind of like what happened with Pastor Derek Reimer, isn't it? Can you break down what happened? Because, from what I'm hearing, he made an annoying sound.
Yes. So the bylaw that he was charged under is you're prohibited from making any noise that would either annoy or disturb a reasonable person. So, yeah, effectively, he made a noise that annoyed somebody. He read scriptures from the Bible in front of the Kenya Meadows pool, and there was a complaint received about it. The police were there. They ticketed him. The bylaw officer ticketed him for making an annoying or disturbing noise.
So, just to get this straight, reading the Bible is making a disturbing or annoying noise to a reasonable person. Is that the crux of their argument?
So the Crown never proceeded with their case.
Yeah.
So we don't really understand what the crux of the argument was necessarily.
Yeah.
But effectively, what we saw and what we understood was that Mr. Reimer, Pastor Reimer, wanted to read scriptures from the Bible. He did so. It was on one of those portable microphone devices, and therefore it was somehow annoying or disturbing, or so was alleged.
Okay. Did they give any justification, or did they just drop the charges and we don't know anything else?
So no, there was justification. They did have a civilian witness who was subpoenaed and either could not or would not show up for the trial. And so once the civilian witness either would not or could not show up, the Crown decided not to proceed, and reasonably so, rightfully so.
So that's interesting, because I can think of another time. I believe Pastor Derek, and I don't believe you were working on this case, but he was downtown on Stephen Avenue, and walking up along Stephen Avenue, I could see a number of buskers using amplification, playing loud music, not permitted. There's no issues whatsoever. He was reading the Bible again. That was basically the only distinction. He's probably doing it quite a bit more quietly than some of the other people. I believe he was ticketed or warned over that. Not to put words in your mouth, but a casual onlooker might suggest that there's some targeted enforcement taking place here.
Yeah, so in this particular incident in front of the Kenya Meadows pool, Mr. Reimer told me that one of the counter protesters to the protest that he was attending was also ticketed, and some others on his side as well. So I don't know what exactly police target was or what they were doing. It certainly seems, though, that, there's very clearly some charter issues being engaged here, right? Like, if you have to be quiet while protesting or while speaking your truth or while expressing your opinions, are you really able to do so? Are you really able to exercise your constitutional rights? So we did file constitutional notice in this case. We were going to argue those issues before the court. Unfortunately, as soon as the Crown doesn't have a case and they withdraw, we don't get to make those arguments. So it is very concerning for, frankly, every political stripe and everybody who wants to express themselves or even doing what we're doing here, right? Like, if somebody doesn't like us, who's to stop them from reporting us for making disturbing or annoying noises? There's no decibels about this ticket. It's just, are you disturbing or annoying? Which is a very subjective thing, really.
And that's the thing, is there are laws. I know sometimes covering protests, generally most people are pretty quiet. There's a few folks that'll have really loud devices, and people nearby, even pro-protesters who'd be on their side, are starting to cover their ears and kind of look around. There's rules in place, I believe, for decibel violations, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are rules, around the outdoor speaker use, right? Hours that you are and are not allowed to use them on public property, that kind of thing. That's not what he was ticketed for. And also decibels. And again, not what he was ticketed for. Also, to our knowledge, of course, we didn't get to run the case, but to our knowledge, nobody asked him to leave. Nobody who is responsible for the area asked him or the counter protesters to leave. So there was some recognition that this was a valid exercise of civil liberties, but for whatever reason, Bible reading or whatever else he may have said was annoying and disturbing.
Now, another question I sort of have for you, and this is maybe a bit off base, but I guess first off, do we know, was it a police officer? Was it a peace officer? Who issued the ticket?
So we know it was a bylaw officer.
Okay.
So although CPS was there, it was actually the bylaw officer who issued the ticket. So one of the City of Calgary bylaw.
I know you're personally sort of passionate about access to justice, no matter who it's for, just generally, whether people can't afford it, whether people are being prosecuted, whether constitutional rights are being violated. How much, though, is all these charges we're seeing that on almost all of them, and we're going to talk about the appeal in a separate interview for Pastor Artur Pawlowski, but ultimately it gets to appeal and they're overthrown. It's been win after win after win. These have been clogging up the courts, but I think to most people out looking from the outside, these charges should have been dropped right off the bat. How much of a backlog is there, and how much of a lack of access to justice is there because of this seeming target persecution? My words, not yours.
So in Canada, we do have a very serious access to justice issue, and we have a real issue with backlog in the courts. So they've created a process in the criminal justice system where if you can't get prosecuted within a reasonable time frame, and there's a whole case from the Supreme Court, we generally earmark it as 18 months, then charges can be thrown out. And the Crown, unfortunately, has to throw out matters of that nature on regular occurrence, right? When that case was first decided, there was quite a few, but it still happens now today that it's very difficult to get through the courts. Now, in this case, the incident that was the subject of the ticket was in February of this year, 2023, and now we're in, later of 2023. Yeah. So reasonably quick, right? Not everything is backlogged, but that's also a function of the fact that we're ready to go to trial. We want to argue this case, right? We're not going to wait for Crown disclosure, right? Or answers to disclosure questions. We're going to say, well, get your case together or not. We want to argue the constitutional issues. Where that might not be the appropriate response for a criminal defendant. A criminal defendant is entitled to and is really requires their full disclosure before they can really assess and get proper legal advice. That's why I love the Democracy Fund and the program that they're running so much, is because these types of issues are really cost prohibitive. It's cost prohibitive to hire a lawyer, and it's just the way it is. I get a lot of people who see me on these types of interviews and call me up, and that's kind of the first thing we have to talk about. So I loved the Democracy Fund for that, and it's a really important thing to get access to justice because the court system is backlogged and lawyers are expensive.
Now, you touch on something there, and we'll wrap up quickly. It's a bit off base, but I think it certainly is relevant. One of the things I've heard, whether it be through the Ingram decision, effectively ultra vires, they went beyond the power that they had, so the constitutional questions were never discussed. And I know a lot of people wanted to ask the constitutional questions, whether it be Pastor Tim Stevens, many other people expressing, I'm happy that I'm off. I'm happy that I'm not going to be facing these charges. It seems the same thing here, though. There's a constitutional challenge, and the courts are like, whoa, backing off. It's happening. It's happened with Nathaniel Pawlowski at other protests. Is there a possibility that they don't want to get into this muddy water, and it is too much of a headache? And is there a legal concern that these conversations aren't being had?
Yeah, so just so we're really clear, it's the Crown that is backing off, not the courts. The courts
Right.
are, giving us time. But yeah, I mean, look, no Crown is ever going to say to me, we didn't prosecute this because we don't want to deal with a constitutional issue. And I did not get that impression from the city prosecutor in this case. Like that, my impression was he was ready to proceed and happy to run this argument as much as I was.
Right.
But there is always that kind of lingering in the back of your mind. Are these simply being withdrawn or not pursued because the person has lawyered up, because the person's lawyer is ready to make these arguments, because there is constitutional arguments being raised? And the result of a constitutional decision from the Court of Justice in Alberta on a bylaw is maybe not binding. It maybe doesn't get the bylaw struck, but it certainly is influential for anybody who gets charged after that.
Right. Well, it's another sort of, for Pastor Derek Reimer anyways, a win in the sense that the charge has gone away. But I know lots of people out there, the Ingram decision, other matters that we're going to discuss, still sort of pending, not fully healed. Maybe the nail's been pulled out, but the wound has not healed over. But I healed over. I want to thank you so much for your important work on this, though, as well as the Democracy Center for making this possible. SavePastorDerek.com is the place where you can chip in to make this legal defense possible. And as always, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos. Well, as Sarah Miller of JSS Barristers astutely pointed out, lawyers cost money. Mounting legal defenses like this cost money. And for many of these people, the cost would be too prohibited to stand up for their rights, to stand up for their fundamental freedoms. So we're counting on folks like you to make contributions. You can help Pastor Derek Reimer himself and his fight for freedom at SavePastorDerek.com.